Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Dr. Rebecca Branstetter. So without further ado, Dr. Rebecca, it's so great to have you on the show.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. Just a quick backstory. I was born in, no, just kidding. I am a school psychologist by trade, and I have never had less than 1,200 students on my case. Okay. So I started out in a large urban school district, and I had 3,000 on my caseload. So that actually was the beginning of the work that I do, which is on burnout prevention, because a lot of times we find that educators are put in these positions where the workload kind of outpaces the amount of time you have in the day. So now, as a school psychologist, I have a company called Thriving Students Collective, which is, I like to call it like the Netflix of thriving. It's an online platform for educators and school psychologists and administrators so that they can have the tools they need to thrive and also co-thrive with their students. So that's the thing that I'm really excited to talk to you about today is burnout prevention and also how that overlaps with things like equity.
Well, I just want to make sure I heard this correctly. Did you say you had 1,200 students and then there was another time you had 3,000 students?
Yeah, the national average of ratio for school psychologists to students, it's 1 to almost 1,200.
Wow.
In some rural areas, it's up to 3,000 or 4,000. So what that means is that, gone are the days, or if there ever was a day, where you could, as a teacher, sort of send the kid who's having a hard time to a school psychologist, because there's not enough of us. And I'm sure the teachers out there listening are like, yes. And we also have a shortage of special educators, as you might know. And
Yes.
So really where this has come to a head is really, post-pandemic. Like, this problem existed before the pandemic, 20 years ago when I started, but it's really been exacerbated as an equity. And what I say all the time, and I think it really resonates, and I hope it resonates with your listeners, every teacher is now a special education teacher.
Yes.
Whether they have ever had any training or not, students with disabilities spend 80% of their day in general ed. And our general educators, only 17% feel equipped to handle those growing needs. And you might know this as a principal. Every human in the building is also now a first-line mental health responder. Did you have any training in mental health first responding?
Sort of. I've here and there. I dabble, I guess, here and there.
Yes, dabbling in the mental health art. So, my mission and message is to kind of raise everyone's, I call it PsyQ, which is like the understanding of how to support complex learners, because everyone needs to be equipped to handle all these growing needs, mental health, learning, special education needs, and not everyone has the training.
So, because we see a lot of schools that would do a lot of professional development, and you're supposed to get your teacher training, you're supposed to learn about IEP, you take the class or whatever, so you're supposed to learn, you get some general information. But outside of that, I would agree, a lot of us aren't getting a lot of very specific, how do you support students with, for example, students with special needs. Why do you think that is?
Are we going to talk about big picture stuff today? Because I just kind of want to like revolutionize how we do professional development in schools. So as a school psychologist, I've sat in a number of trainings. Some were interesting and relevant, but then I didn't know how to apply it in real time. I have sat in professional development trainings that have nothing to do with my job or my role. And I fundamentally believe that PD, the way we're arranging it in schools, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not, but it's often too long and too late. If you have a kid with dyslexia in your class, you can't wait till November 12th, some random Friday, to learn about how to support them. If you have a kid who's like self-injurious, they're cutting themselves, they're suicidal, or they're acting out or shutting down, you're like, well, I can't wait for that PD next year about that, right? So PD needs to be kind of in the flow of work.
Yeah.
And I think there is a great movement towards professional learning communities and kind of collaborations around PD. But I am really interested in tapping into how adults actually learn. And it's not in a cafeteria for 6 hours in a sit and get. It's on demand, and it's in a format that's sort of interesting, engaging, and kind of emulates social media. It's YouTube, it's podcasts, it's even TikTok. So what my organization does is instead of, having the teachers have to sort of go out and look like, oh my gosh, how do I help this kid with autism in my class? And sort of scrambling, our platform has this sort of, Netflix of thriving. There's a whole channel, how to support kids with autism, and it's trusted professionals. But for those folks who are out there listening, or like, cool story, Rebecca, I don't have that platform. Really what it is talking to your leaders about the support you need. And we talked before this, we did a pre-game chat before this, and you talked about like, what contributes to burnout. Well, this is it. If you have a kid who's acting out and shutting down in your classroom, or a kid you can't reach and teach, and you're teaching your guts out and they're still not responding, that is stressful. It kind of triggers your nervous system all day long. I mean, you work in a high school. What kind of things are you seeing teachers contending with in the classroom?
It's the amount of academic progress and ensuring students are getting work done. Our model is a little different than a traditional school setting, where we only ask kids to come in twice a week. So they come in twice a week for 2 hours at a time, and the majority of the work they're doing independently. So some of the big challenges for us is just ensuring that students are working independently. They come for their appointments and they're ready to take a test or a quiz, whatever they need to do as far as the assessment side of things go, or they're turning in work. So that can be frustrating because, there's goals as a school that we have to hit, benchmarks that we're looking to meet. And, if you got a caseload of, multiple students on your list, and they all have different motivational things that they need in order to get that work done, it can be a challenge.
And I think what you've tapped into is something that a lot of teachers tell me is a struggle for them. Mm-hmm. So they have this classroom, and whether it's an innovative classroom like you have of kids on your caseload, or whether it's a classroom of, 30 kids, 8 periods a day that you're kind of working with, all kinds of learners. Many of them will be on IEPs, many on 504s. And it's really challenging to differentiate for every single student's learning profile in the classroom. Not impossible, but then we look to kind of principles of universal design for learning. Yep. So my favorite analogy, if you're not familiar with UDL out there, and a lot of people probably are, is okay, let's date ourselves, Sheldon. Are you old enough to remember when suitcases didn't have wheels? You had to pick them up.
Yeah, so old school, you had to carry them.
How was that? Was that a good experience for you?
Not as a kid. No, definitely appreciate the wheels.
Right? Okay, so yes, I had a strawberry shortcake one that you lug around, whatever. So someone invented the wheels. Now, do you know that it was originally invented so that people who were disabled and couldn't bear weight and the elderly could lift their bags. But then, fun fact, it works for everyone, so everyone's using it. So what is the wheelie bag solution for all these complex learners? Well, I'm going to tell you that, do you use like the MTSS pyramid or tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 for your academics or anything
Something
like that?
Similar. Yeah, in a sense, not necessarily as formative, but yes, we do have different tiers that we do. We have an interventionist that's at our school that does a lot of the support for students that might need a little bit more of that tier 3 support.
Yeah. So we're looking at that pyramid. We all love the pyramid in every presentation about supporting kids and interventions. So we look at tier 1, which is those universal strategies. What helps all kids? And I always look as a school psychologist and as a mom who parented in the pandemic. So we all know what it's like when kids are stressed out. How well does that go for learning? When we're all stressed out, we are in brainstem. We're in fight, flight, freeze. And then we're not in our frontal lobe where all that great thinking can occur. So anxiety is on the rise in all of our students and all humans right now. And so we're in this perpetual fight, flight, freeze. What does fight, flight, freeze look like for students? Well, fight looks like exactly what you think of: arguing and refusing to do stuff and talking back and etc. Or sometimes even tipping over chairs and things. And then freeze looks like shutting down. It's the hoodie, right? That's a stress reaction. So when we see kids who are in fight or flight, what it looks like is acting out or shutting down. Now, you're not going to be able to implement the coolest reading or math program or curricula on the planet if your kid's in brainstem. So I propose that like tier 1 needs to really double down, especially in this time period, on emotional regulation and executive functioning. For those of you new to the term executive functioning, these are all of those great planning skills in your brain. I'm pointing up here because it's the frontal lobe. We're planning, organizing, starting tasks. I think you've had episodes on executive functioning for your listeners. And really what it is like the boss in your brain. Okay, the boss is like, hey, don't play Fortnite all night. maybe do your homework because there's a reward at the end. And it's the fact that I get to get graduation credits, or my mom's not mad at me, or my teacher's proud of me. But they go together, and that's really needs to be at the tier 1 level. So a lot of times I work with teachers like, that's the counselor's job. That's the school psych's job. That's the teacher, special ed teacher's job. I don't teach executive functioning. I don't teach, emotional regulation. Like, I'm a math teacher. But the thing is, once you unpack it, Sheldon, teachers are already doing this. They just don't know they are. And that's where PD can come in. What are you already doing, and how could you fold more in your day, not as an add on, like a new lesson, but in your curriculum? What are those tier 1 interventions? And that's what's so exciting when I work with teachers and mental health providers across the country, is really doing a universal design for learning for what are classrooms where kids feel safe, seen, heard, listened to. That sets the stage for the academic growth.
Thank you for that. And so what I'm hearing is we're already doing a lot of the stuff. What do you mean by that? I guess is the question. What are teachers doing that they probably don't know that they're doing already?
Well, a couple of things. So in the emotional regulation realm, I like to say that teachers have an opportunity. Your emotional regulation yourself is actually a tier 1 intervention. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. So think teachers out there, a day where you were feeling great. You had a great restful weekend. You had the coolest lesson plan, planned, and you couldn't wait. You were excited. You get there and you're like, hey kids, we're going to learn about this today. We're going to learn about kinetic energy. And you bring that joy and excitement, and your kids pick up on it. Yeah. Now, conversely, think of a day where you had a horrible sleep, your kids were acting up, and you're having a hard time, your mom's sick, and maybe you spilled coffee on your shirt that and you're running late, and why so much traffic, and you're just not in a good mood. You come to class and you're like, okay, and one kid does a little thing and you're a little bit on edge, and then that sets the tone. So we know from the neuroscience, and this is where I love to geek out. Here's a 2-minute neuroscience lesson for
go for it.
Have you heard of mirror neurons?
No, go for it. I'm listening.
Okay. So human emotions are contagious. You thought COVID was contagious? Emotions are contagious, meaning within 0.33 milliseconds of being in the same room with another human, you subconsciously are able to detect how they're feeling. It's the reason why when you walk into a parent-teacher conference, you're like, something funky in here. No one said anything, right? But you can feel it.
Right.
And then in another about 0.33 milliseconds, you subconsciously try to match that other person's emotions. So our kids are constantly mirror neuroning each other, and constantly our moods set the tone for our classroom. Okay. So when our kids, we can be, and I love this analogy, you can be either the thermostat or the thermometer in your classroom. Okay. So if you are, the thermometer, when your kids are acting up, you're like, your nervous system's up. When your kids are really low and unenergetic, you're like, okay, God, why is this the longest class period of my life? Instead, if you're, the thermostat, you're like, I'm a cool 68, hey. Then when your kids are acting up, you bringing them down with your calm. And when your kids are low, you're bringing them up with your energy. So this actually is something teachers do all day long, and they don't know it. So the first step is awareness. If you're aware that you're having a bad day or you're stressed out, that's when you can tap into in the moment sort of mindfulness and just take a breath, or even just be honest with your students. This is the easiest, cheapest intervention there is. Class, have you ever had a bad day? Well, Dr. Rebecca just spilled all over her favorite blouse. I was late to work. The copier didn't work. My Google Drive deleted itself. I don't know. And I'm feeling really dysregulated. You know what that means? That means that I feel off. I feel grouchy. Has anyone ever felt grouchy? When's the time you felt grouchy? Yeah. What do you guys do when you're feeling grouchy? Because I need a reboot here, friends. Oh, I take a break. I listen to music. Great. You know what? Let's do a dance party. Let's just play a song and reboot. Or let's just go outside for a second, do deep breathing, whatever. And guess what happens, Sheldon? You get to be the living lesson plan for your kids. You are demonstrating, and we talk about modeling all the time. You're modeling for your kids what to do when you're in brainstem.
Yeah.
And how to get back in the frontal lobe. You call it out. It costs $0. $0.
And where
it's free 99.
Yeah. So not only are we exhibiting this, taking care of ourselves, but then we're also showing our students how to help support themselves as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, all right. So what I heard initially early on in the conversation was it's not necessarily about the lesson that you're providing, like the content that you created, the lesson plan, but it's more of the energy or how you present the lesson plan when it comes to like maybe engagement or even support. Is that kind of where I heard things?
And so also on the executive functioning end, which I love to geek out about executive functioning all day long. I have a couple books on that for parents, and I have a master class on executive functioning for teachers. There's things you're doing in your day that actually are boosting executive function, and just slight tweaks in what you're doing can boost that. So here's an example. So let's say you've provided a lesson plan, they all have a worksheet, and you see that kid who is not starting. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're doing, but maybe it just, they're not doing it. Maybe they're, they're kind of acting out. They're talking to their friends. They're moving about, kind of ADHD energy, or maybe they're, head down on the desk. So as a teacher, you might go up and like, you need to get started. We're on number 1. I need you to get your pencil, and we provide like, this is number 1. You're gonna start here, right? As teachers, we tend to give, directions, which is great. When a kid is in brainstem, commands, demands, requests, threats, if you don't finish this, you're not going to blah, blah, blah. That keeps kids in brainstem, okay? Because they're threatened. Finish this. I need you to do it, blah, blah, blah. Think about when you're stressed. And if someone came up to you, Sheldon, and was like, you need to finish this. Start on number 1 now. Whoa, right? Yeah. You're stressed. So when you see that behavior, your brain needs to be like, that's a stress reaction. Here's the executive functioning hack. When you ask, first you lean in with empathy. Seems like you're having a hard time getting started. How can I support you? What's bothering you about this assignment? What do you need from me right now to help get started? Do you hear what I'm doing with my voice, Sheldon? It's like the late night FM DJ voice. It's really non-threatening. And you're like, oh, I'm going to listen to that. Okay.
So what if I have all right. So I've been in that situation as a teacher. I love the voice tone and that. But then what if the student's like, I don't know. I don't want to talk. Like that's their response.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And sometimes I say, well, tell you what, why don't you have a think on it? I'm going back in 2 minutes and you can let me know. And then you come back and they're still like, I don't know. I'm like, well, what's your getting started plan? And they're like, what? Like it kind of jars them like, wait, what? What is a getting started plan? Well, would you like some suggestions on how some kids get started? So one of the things I like to do is actually, maybe it's a difficulty audit. So a lot of times kids aren't starting because it's too easy, too hard, or it's not interesting. So you can ask the kid, give them a multiple choice test. So normalize it. A lot of kids have a hard time getting started on this task. I've been teaching for 20 years. I've seen it all, kid. On 1 to 10, like how difficult does this seem? 0 is like, this is so boring, I could cry. And 10 is like, this is so hard, I can't even believe like you're giving this to us. Like, where are you at? And if they're like, I'm at like, it's so boring. Empathy. I understand it's hard to get started on boring stuff. I have boring stuff I have to get started on all the time. It's bogus. I get it. At the same time, I'd love for you to finish this so that you can have free time. What do you want to do in that free time? Motivation is the ability to anticipate a positive emotion of the future. This is bad now, but ooh, you get a dopamine hit actually just thinking about free time. How do you want to spend that free time? Once we get through it, hey, would you be willing? I love the try-in before buy-in language. Would you be willing to get started on this and then help your friend over here who might need a little help? Because if this is so easy for you, man, I could use your help in helping your peers. You see how it's like a subtle shift between commands, requests, threats? When you ask non-threatening questions, like what's your getting started plan? And you actually kind of get curious, not furious, about why they're not starting. And if they don't know, it's okay. Listen, last time you were stressed out, were you perfectly articulate in what you wanted to say? No, because when you're stressed out, you can't think. It's like when someone insults you and then like 2 hours later, you're like, I had the perfect comeback.
Yeah.
You never have the perfect comeback in the moment because you're flooded with emotion. They may not know, but you're going to be a gentle, thoughtful partner with them. And it doesn't mean you have to be like, just warm and not firm. It's both. I really need us to get this done today so we can move on to something else, perhaps a little more interesting. How can I support you?
And not only does that help with getting the student more motivated and developing that relationship, but like you said, it shows the empathy, and then also it supports the burnout, right? The frustration on your end as an educator, because you're looking at the student, and again, there's always a story behind why a student is acting the way they're acting, and just being able to say, okay, I got them going, I had a breakthrough, whatever it is. All these things make so much sense to me. Thank you so much for sharing this.
You're welcome. I think one of the things that we forget as educators is that, number one, we set the emotional tone in the classroom. But number two is that kids aren't giving us a hard time when they're not doing their work.
Yeah.
They're having a hard time. They're having a hard time with emotional regulation. They're having a hard time with executive functioning. And when we lean in with compassion and empathy, then we're more likely to have those great breakthroughs, which was like the reason we became educators, is reaching and teaching these kids who have complex needs. It's so satisfying. But here's the rub. You have to be in a space where you have patience to do that. And when we're stressed out, we're in brainstem, right? And we're not thinking properly. Now, here's the thing. I think lately, and maybe it's always been the case, but I've seen it ramp up, is this sort of self-care. I'm telling you, I never say the S word when I'm doing presentations on burnout. I will get things thrown at me. If I tell one more teacher to like self-care, it doesn't go well. And why is that? Self-care bad? No. But it suggests that your burnout is a personal self-care fail. You're not doing enough. You're not working out enough. You're not carving it out enough me time. I tell you what, self-care is off the job after the stress has already happened. And I want to look upstream, Sheldon. What is causing the stress? So that we can address that and not build a life we have to escape from on Self-Care Sunday. Because there's no bubble bath that was relaxing enough to get me out of a 3,000 kid caseload.
This is interesting. Okay, so because I never looked at it this way, and I've had a lot of episodes in regards to self-care, and so now you're bringing at a different angle that I never considered. Tell me more. So is self-care not? If I tell someone, hey, what does your self-care regimen look like? What is that could taken I guess it could be received as, look, you're saying this is on me, why I'm feeling this way. Is that kind of what I heard?
That's what I'm hearing from teachers.
Okay.
They're like, if I hear self-care one more time, I'm going to friggin' scream. So I think it's a both and. There's nothing that's absolute. It's like, I wouldn't ever be like, you shouldn't self-care, right? What I'm saying is there's a combo deal.
Okay.
There's on the job and off the job. There's a thing called the stress cycle. Okay. Whereas the stressor happens, the stressor goes away, and then our nervous system has to reboot from that.
Yeah.
And we have these micro stressors all day long. The copier doesn't work. That kid gave me an eye roll. That parent sent me a nasty gram. Okay. And then the stressor goes away. If we don't complete the stress cycle, release it through self-care, then it stacks up and the body keeps a score, and we get sick and we have to take sick days. So it's absolutely essential that we release that stress. How do you do that? The classics: working out, being with people, and healthy distraction. Watching an episode of Abbott Elementary never hurt anyone, because laughter is great medicine. Okay. Those three things: do a thing, be with a person, and move your body. Those three things those are essentials. That's like, food and water for teachers. Right. You got to do it to release the stress cycle. But the other thing, the slight twist on that is, what can we do about the stressors to have less stressors? And that's where leaders come in. What can I take off your plate right now? How can I support you? You need more support for these kids with autism in your classroom or ADHD, and you don't have the training? Awesome. Let me provide you on-demand learning for that. Let's do 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of our staff meeting to talk about what our best practices in our community. If you have constant stressors that are predictable and repeatable, such as you have a bunch of kids with complex needs and you don't have the training, let's talk about that. That's the root. I like to call this all kind of like tier 0 support. Right? Underneath all of these great interventions is, what can we do to support our teachers, our school psychologists, our mental health providers, our speech language pathologists, everybody in the building, all the adults in the building. And so it is not that self-care is bad. It's definitely necessary, but not sufficient.
It's more than just self-care.
It's more than just Self-Care Sunday.
Self-Care Sunday.
I love Self-Care Sunday. I'm here to tell you, I go with my daughters. I go downtown. We take a little bike ride. We get our nails did. As you can see, I need it. Sunday. This looks bad.
Today's Sunday, so right?
Today's Sunday. I'm doing that right after this. That is absolutely vital. But at the same time, what's upstream? What's causing this? How can we interrupt the stress cycle at the beginning, not just deal with it at the.
So a message that I took from this part is, as a principal, is, what can I do in my leadership role to, like you said, take something off of someone's plate. Should I wait for a teacher or a staff member to come up to me and say, I'm stressed? Or are there some ways that I could be proactive in my approach so that I can take some things off so they don't feel like they have to come to me for things?
I'm here to tell you, at the height of my burnout, I was 15 years in, I was in an Oakland school district. If someone had come to me and be like, girl, are you burnt out? I'd be like, no, I'm just really tired.
Yeah.
Because we don't identify passion for our kids as burnout. We identify burnout as like the guy who's phoning it in who don't care, but we care so much that we're working longer, stronger, harder, faster, beating ourselves up for not being, good enough to get to every kid and not giving ourselves that self-compassion. Like, I'm doing the best with the tools I have at the time at my disposal. Mm-hmm. So I think that if we wait until teachers come to us, it's almost too late. At that point, they have identified it. I think we need to be proactive, and we need to set up the spaces and places where we can do that. So here's three things off the cuff that I've seen that leaders have done. So one, and I can't remember the snappy name for this, but I learned this from a colleague. It's basically like a listening session where the principal sits in the room, and this is hard for principals, and the teachers just share out, here's something I'm stressed about. The key is the principal in that moment just has to write it down, not try to solve it, just write it down. Okay, so I'm hearing that when, these kids don't show up for school, that stresses you out because you worry about them. Got it. I hear that your classroom is 10 degrees Celsius and that's freezing for you, or whatever it is, or you don't have enough prep time, or your prep time is being taken by IEPs, and just listen. And every, whatever cadence, it's a listening session. I hear you. Okay. And then you take it back to your leadership team and you have a think like, oh, what is within our control? What can we actually do to move the needle? And you can come back to that meeting like, we heard you. The consensus around here was that y'all want to keep your prep time sacred. The challenge is, we also have to do IEPs. So we're working on as our leadership team on that. Then everyone feels heard. Like, I'm doing everything in my power to support you. Another thing that principals have done is they have done professional development specifically around burnout prevention. And there's various things that I've done. I pushed into schools and done it like whole school, district-wide, et cetera. And now, is this an appropriate time for a shameless plug for my book?
Go for it.
What?
We didn't mention your book.
That's
we
crazy.
Forgot to mention it.
Book club. Have a little book club. This is like the atomic habits of it for educators. Small, neuroscience-backed micro habits that are too small to fail. What can you do in the job when the stress is actually happening to avoid burnout and thrive? And dare I say, co-thrive with your students, because when you're thriving, your students pick up on that and they are thriving. So anyway, a book club is an easy way to get started. You can talk about it. Chapter 1 is all about your strengths. We always talk about kids' strengths. We try to tap into their strengths. Have you ever taken a strengths inventory?
Is that Clifton?
Clifton's one of them.
Yeah, I have that right here, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, there you go. What's your?
Yeah, I just harmony. Man, I don't remember all of them, but I did it like in April, so I had the list somewhere. I had to go find it. But I remember harmony. Harmony was one of them.
Harmony, right? So now you can think about like, all right, every morning, your little daily affirmation, like, how can I bring harmony into my day? How can I tap into my strength? So we have a strength-based inventory that's just for educators. It harnesses Clifton's strengths via character and 4 pillars of thriving, which is my own research on how to prevent burnout. And it put it all together. Have you ever heard of the Enneagram?
Yes, I had a guest that talked about that before.
Okay, great. So ours is called the Thrivogram. Okay, so it's 8 personality types that suit you best as an educator. So first off, it's like, what is your strength? How do you unlock that? So you're gonna be on like cutting edge of positive psychology research. You could understand, how does that play out in your day? How do you use that to prevent burnout? What is the dark side of your strength? What is the burnout trap? Once you know it, you don't walk into it. How do you get out of it? And then there's practical suggestions on how to use that strength in your day to co-thrive with your kiddos. So this is all free, $99, again, for people to take the Thrivogram. You'll put it in the show notes, but it's thrivingstudents.com/thrive, no hyphens. And you can take this inventory and it will tell you, listen, this is your strength. So one of mine is love of learning. So like when I'm going into a contentious parent meeting, I'm a school psychologist, so I've had a couple of those. Instead of being like, oh, this is gonna be horrible and this is gonna be so stressful and this lawyer's here and an advocate's here and my report, I love learning. I'm going to learn how to present difficult news well, and I'm going to learn how to, not take things personally. And I'm going to learn how to collaborate and connect with people who are frustrated. Okay. Or if your strength is like forgiveness, after all this meeting is done, I'm going to forgive the advocate for coming in hot because I know they're just trying to help kids. And so when you arm yourself with your strengths prior to a stressful event, the research shows that you interpret the event as less stressful. And our brains believe what we tell them. If we tell them this is going to suck, it's going to suck. Now, if we say I can use my strengths to get through this and I've survived every single IEP meeting I've ever been to, then you have a different lens. So it really taps into positive psychology. So this is something fun you could do for free with your staff or as a teacher. Take the Thrivogram, have a discussion about it, have a book club. There's a number of ways that you can start to really do those tier 0 supports for teachers and your mental health providers in the schools.
Got you.
I want you to take the Thrivogram and I want you to report back to me what your strengths are. I find that would be very interesting and for your listeners to know what your strengths are.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. And folks, we got the links in the show notes, so definitely check it out. And I'll go ahead and find out my strengths as well. I'll say this, Dr. Rebecca, I've learned a lot from this conversation, especially like some of the key takeaways were like the self-care conversation we had, talking about like just the energy that we bring into the classroom and how that impacts how that lesson will go. And then as an administrator myself, just being able to support staff and say, what can I take off of their plate? What can I do to support them so that they aren't burning out? Because it's so much to retain, to have to rehire someone, to go through that whole process and interviews and then background checks. And man, it's just been crazy. So these are some really valuable feedbacks that I've gotten just from this conversation. I'd love for you to take us home with any final word of advice to our listeners out there.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball. Okay, I'm going to introduce a new concept, but it's one of the concepts in my book that it's my favorite chapter, but don't tell the others. Self-compassion. Okay. Self-compassion is treating yourself like you would a best friend. Self-compassion can be done on the job when the stress is actually happening. Self-care, again, off the job, important, valuable, essential. Self-compassion is being gentle with yourself. So self-care, the bubble bath after work. Self-compassion is the bubbles in your mind that you are telling yourself. The research shows when we are self-compassionate, we're less likely to burn out. What does that look like? It looks like us having 3 things. In a moment of stress, you tell yourself 3 things. The first is mindfulness. You identify the stress. I feel stressed out because that lesson plan did not go well. And I spent all weekend on Pinterest planning it. And when you do that, it tames your amygdala. We call name it to tame it, which is I feel stressed, I feel worried, I feel anxious, I feel sad. That alone can tamper down the stress. It reduces amygdala firing, which is the fire alarm in our brain that we're in trouble. The second one is common humanity, which is I'm not the only teacher who has had a lesson that didn't go to plan. I am not alone. There's nothing wrong with me as a teacher. Sometimes lessons don't go well and I learn from them. And the third is, what advice would I give a best teacher friend right now? Well, I tell them, tweak it for next time. You did your best. Why don't you take the weekend off? Because rested, happy minds are actually better and more creative. And that's where the self-care comes in. So when we are self-compassionate, it actually drives self-care. And then we do self-care, we're in a better headspace and we're more compassionate. It's a virtuous cycle versus a vicious cycle. And I think that self-compassion, these are hard times, Sheldon. We are having a hard time ourselves. And so if we can give ourselves the same grace, love, and compassion we give our colleagues, then we're going to be in a much better place ourselves. And you said it. I mean, recruiting is hard. Retention is the new recruitment. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're a teacher and you put your heart and soul and years and all this training, don't give up. Because there are things that you can do. And I know it's hard, but start with self-compassion. And it's not easy to dig yourself out of burnout, but it is possible. I was in burnout for 15 years. And when I started studying the science of positive psychology and burnout, and I didn't change districts, I changed from within. Because wherever you go, there you are. You go to a new district and you haven't figured out how to deal with stress, then that cycle repeats in your next district. The grass isn't always greener somewhere else. It's just different grass.
I like that, different grass. We're going to leave it there. If we got some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
The best way, first, thrivingstudents.com. We have a number of free resources. You can join my Thrive Archive newsletter, which is monthly tools you can use to support complex learner and protect yourself from burnout. Also, feel free to take the Thrivogram, thrivingstudents.com/Thrivogram. But also, if you are interested in seeing embarrassing TikToks, my middle school daughter has deemed my TikTok profile cringe, but good dancing. So if you like cringe, but good dancing on topics such as how to help neurodiverse students, burnout prevention, my TikTok handle is at Thriving Students. And my Instagram is at Thriving School Psych. And I'm sure you'll put them in the show notes. But you know what? Burnout is a heavy topic. So it's no laughing matter, but sometimes humor heals. So there's some interesting things if you want to check those out on TikTok or Instagram.
All right, absolutely. And again, we'll leave all the links in the show notes, folks. Dr. Rebecca Branstetter is here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.